All right, good evening, everyone, on this rainy Wildwood evening. Still beautiful to be in Wildwood. Welcome to the work session for the City Council for Monday, August the 10th. Ms. Elder, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Boland.
Here.
Councilmember Garatano.
Here.
Councilmember Glasser.
Here.
Councilmember Hope.
Present.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell. Councilmember Donian.
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni. Councilmember Gross.
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCann.
Present.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Here.
All right, welcome again. Going to the informational items before we get to our one action item. I believe we have 5 items under information. Does any member of the council wish to discuss or ask any questions relative to anything that is shown on the agenda under information? Councilmember Clark.
Got it. Yes, I just want to go on the record that I know that I've been told that the Green Pines Park, the playground tower is within the safety regulations, but I feel that it's way too tall for the preschool children to be playing on.
Joe, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Clark had sent me an email earlier today kind of expressing her concerns. I responded just by saying that the equipment was picked out for specific age groups. The age groups then were connected to equipment that was appropriate for such, and that our park designer verified it as well. We also did the extra step of submitting the project to St. Louis County for building permits. Saying all of that, we will double check it to make sure. We're still early enough in the construction process that if there's something that's gone awry, we can address it. So I'll have an update for you in 2 weeks.
Go ahead, Councilmember Clark.
Thanks, Joe. I had one more issue on letter D on the TAP application. I was noticing on the maps that the new sidewalk is showing that it goes all the way to from Nantucket Meadows to Nantucket Island Drive, but that section already has a sidewalk. Is that to replace that one, or because it looks like a pretty good sidewalk?
Rick, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, Mayor, thank you very much. Councilmember Clark, you're correct. The trail at the very south end proposes to remove the sidewalk and replace it with trail, so that we have a consistent 10-foot width trail all the way down to Nantucket Island Drive. So there is a short section that we're proposing to remove the sidewalk and replace it with full 10-foot wide trail in lieu of the existing 4-foot sidewalk. So it'll be usable, and the intent there is to have a full trail from that southern end all the way up to the end of this project. And then someday in the future, there could be a phase 2 where we went from that point further to the north up to Old State Road or Ridge Road rather.
So I guess I don't understand why we would, I mean, just to make it, we just want to make it within 10 feet, just like the rest of it. That's the only reason we're going to dig that one up and replace it.
The idea would be to have a full width trail all the way to the terminus on that south side. The existing 4-foot sidewalk wouldn't provide the functionality that we're looking for. Ultimately, to provide for bikes and pedestrians. To really provide for those bikes, you need to have the 10-foot width. And so that 4-foot doesn't work so well. And so that was the idea on that end, to remove the sidewalk and replace it with a full width trail. And again, to the north, the idea at some point there would be potentially a phase 2, and the sidewalk that's there would be widened or replaced, and the 10-foot trail could be installed to the north as well.
One more question. I just had understood the purpose of this was for safety for the pedestrians, not for a trail. So am I wrong on that?
Now, the shared use path is just that it's shared users, it's bikes and pedestrians. So we're hoping to gain both those users, and by designing it the full width, it'll provide that functionality. So if it was just for pedestrians, we would look at potentially a more narrower sidewalk. Typical width for a sidewalk right now is 5 feet. So to get the full functionality, that's why we put in the 10-foot wide path.
Councilmember Garitano.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I am speaking about 2 items that are on tonight's work session agenda. The first item is just to keep everyone informed regarding Celebrate Wildwood, and the Celebrate Wildwood Committee has been doing a great job. They just met again to finalize their recommendation for the dates that will be in all right, video's working now. So the Celebrate Wildwood Commission met, and they are recommending that we schedule Celebrate Wildwood in the spring, and then we will conduct the art festival in the fall. So hopefully we will continue to monitor the effects of COVID, and hopefully things will continue to trend in a positive direction there. But the recommendation is that we will do Celebrate Wildwood around the April timeframe, an art festival around October. So that would be splitting out the events as we did in 2019. I mean, 2019, we split out the events back then. And we will now try that again in 2021, see how that works out, as well as seeing how the dates work out with doing a Celebrate Wildwood in the spring, see how that informs us. So that's, again, just informational here. The committee does continue to work and plan for these events. And regarding the other item, which Councilmember Clark mentioned on the work session for tonight with regards to the TAP funding application for the Old State Road Shared Use Path. Just to give everybody some background, several years ago, this area of Old State Road was identified as an area that would have a major project at the time to do a trail, and also to do improvements to the road, such as adding a median, widening the road. The road is very narrow in some sections today. There are no sidewalks throughout the whole length of the road. There's segments of sidewalks that really don't lead to anywhere, because you basically end up walking into another property or into trees. So they're not that helpful where they end and terminate. So the residents of that area, Ward 8 and Ward 7, there are a lot of neighborhoods along there, Vintage Grove, Nantucket, Fairhaven Estates, the Country Ridge Estates neighborhood, and others that really could benefit, such as the enclaves and Crown Point Estates. These people are not able to be connected to the neighborhoods or trails that serve our city. So the work here right now that has been under discussion for some time is to basically see if we can do just the trail portion of it. We're not going to pursue the road portion, the trail portion, because there is no safe passage right now. And it is an area that's been identified, as I said a few years ago. It was identified, also been identified in the St. Louis County Action Plan as an area that needs improvements. So the Admin and Public Works Committee at its last meeting did approve a conceptual plan, which was at a cost, I think, of about $9,900, just slightly under $10,000. And that is to give us estimates such as what the cost will be. So this enables us, by passing the resolution tonight, will enable us to submit an application so that we could seek TAP funding, Transportation Alternatives Program funding, that is administered by the East-West Gateway Group. And we are proposing that the city of Wildwood would only pay 20% of that. So that's $280,000, with the remainder of the cost, the 80%, being federal funds. So that is a very nice plus for the city. That's a lot of money that the city could benefit from that potentially could go to other cities. So we have been very successful in our TAP applications in the past, especially these types of projects, which are transportation alternatives. It promotes the use of trails. This money is specifically dedicated TAP funds for these kinds of projects. You can't necessarily use TAP funds for everything, such as highways and roads. These are transportation alternatives. So that is the resolution tonight. Residents have been very, focused on trying to get this work done. And I know some residents may even speak about it tonight to share some of their experiences and why they would like to see it connected. What really resonates with me is the residents have told me that they sometimes don't feel like they're part of Wildwood. They're not connected. And I know that we're trying to work on that throughout the city in different areas here. And so here's an area where we're so close to it. We're trying to get that connection there to existing trails already that are existing there. And it's, again, highly rated in the St. Louis County Action Plan. I think it's gotten quite a bit of feedback as an area that needs that kind of work. So just wanted to give you, again, this information there. And I failed to leave out not only Nantucket, but Lake Chesterfield. So the Ward 7 folks, I'm sure they've heard it. I've heard it from those folks as well that live there, that they'd like to see that connection. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Bennett, you had your raise hand on your Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In response to Ms. Clark's question, I would also note the current existing sidewalk at 4 feet in width is not ADA compliant. It reflects being constructed by St. Louis County a number of years ago. To make it ADA compliant, it would have to be increased in width. So in this particular case, we can create a trail that exceeds the ADA requirement for width and also accommodate other users on it as well. So it really achieves a number of goals by the design that the Department of Public Works and Rick Brown has proposed. Thank you.
Councilmember Remy.
Just a question also, Mr. Garitano, you eloquently spoke about the project. I know you mentioned 20% to Wildwood. If I remember correctly, I believe it's 20%, but 10%, half of that is going to be split, I believe, with the county. If that could just be clarified, I thought that that's what it was. And if I remember correctly, then it's not an expenditure for the upcoming year. This is something over a number of years that would be part of our budget, I think, in 2022. Just wanted to verify that.
I think I'll let our Public Works Director respond to the question there about the funding. I think that's a good point to see if we could get that portion of it from the county. That would be fantastic. And also, as you mentioned, this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow. These projects usually have a couple multi-year cycles, so it takes time for us to be able to first get the design work done. Then there's a period of time where we have to acquire certain easements. And then finally, before we can get to construction. So this is something that, like most projects, they take several years to get them going. And so we would probably not see something until maybe 2023, 2024. But Director of Public Works, Rick Brown, can probably answer that best.
Rick, do you want to respond to Councilor Rooney's question?
Sure. Councilmember Garitano is correct in that the grant funds, if we get them, would be available in years 2022 through 2024, construction being in 2024, and that would be the biggest chunk of it. 2022 would be engineering, and then there'd be right away in 2023. So it would be spread amongst those 3 years.
I think the question was about the 10%.
As far as the match, I think I alluded to this at the committee meeting. We have asked the county if they would consider splitting the local 20% match. We have not yet received a response. We will continue working on that as a goal to see if they would be agreeable to doing that. And hopefully that would be something they could do. But we don't have that commitment as of yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor McCune.
Yes, I want to thank Councilmember Garitano for saying what he said and kind of just reiterate how important it is for Ward 7 to have this opportunity as well with 8, because we don't have a pocket park or any type of park facility for any children or any activities, but the connectivity to Rock Hollow by a trail would be a lot safer for these kids to access more of Wildwood than what we have access now. So like all those neighborhoods do need something that can maybe allow that safety component to access, more of Wildwood. And I just want to reiterate that I asked this council for support of that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, you may know this. I think it was part of the greater park action plan to connect all wards together, to connect to all of the trails. So maybe this is part of that initiative that we had planned out a long time ago. And maybe this is Ward 7's time to have that connection. So I think if we look at the park action revision that we did recently a couple years ago, I think that we emphasize this expansion or this possibility. So just a comment for the rest of the council that wasn't here before. I would ask for your support with this, and hopefully we can get some funding with this. So thank you.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Councilmember Remy asked the majority of the questions that I had, but the design funding, is that going to be out of this year's budget, next year's budget?
Rick.
Councilmember McCutcheon, the engineering or design the funds would not be available till 2022. So it wouldn't be this year or next year, it would be 2022.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything for Councilmember Dodwell? Did you have something?
5 different places to turn on start. Do you need a motion to proceed forward at this time, or will we be doing that at full council?
We'll be doing that at full council.
Okay,
thanks for that question. Okay, anything further from any member of the council relative to the items under information? Councilmember Boast.
Yeah, Joe, a question. Is there any update with the internet to Homestead since the memo you drafted?
Actually, there is. Mr. Brown released the permit to Bays ET for the work in the right of way, I believe, late Thursday or on Friday. So he turned it around in record time, and we appreciate it very much.
Okay, so as far as you know, everything's at Ameren that they need?
That is on Bays ET. Bays ET is required to apply to Ameren, but if Ameren, Missouri asks for authorization from the city, they now have it.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks to all. Anything further before we go to action items? Actually, action item, we have one. All right, seeing none. The only action item we have is a closed session item. And so we need a motion, which will be a roll call vote under Missouri law, to go into closed session. Would someone like to make that motion? Made by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Flasher. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll for the vote to go into closed session?
Councilmember Garitano,
Abstain?
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Pope,
Hope.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councilmember Bernardino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Ryan,
Yes.
Councilmember Baratoni,
I got a bigger one. Yes.
Councilmember Rose,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes, and I'll join you guys in person in a couple minutes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Abstain.
Councilmember Gilani,
Yes.
Councilmember McKeon,
Yes.
Councilmember Rainbow,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Look at that.
Councilmember Hudson,
Look like the clown.
Yes.
Okay, so we will move into closed session. And we will start the main meeting of the council at 7 o'clock.
We're not a
All right, good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the meeting of the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, August the 10th, 2020. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Bowen,
Here.
Councilmember Garitano,
Present?
Councilmember Foster,
Here.
Councilmember Vogt,
Present.
Councilmember Farrelletto,
Here.
Councilmember Dodson, here, Councilmember Ryan, here, Councilmember Scarpelli,
Here.
Councilmember Gross,
Here.
Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Edens,
Here.
Councilmember Brady,
Here.
Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember Galani,
Here.
Councilmember McCune,
Here.
Councilmember Rainbow,
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember McCutcheon,
Here,
Okay, thank you.
here.
You done with the roll, Ms. Elbridge? Okay, thank you. For those of you that are comfortably able, if you would please stand with me for the saying of our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Moving to the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the council's work session and regular agenda from the last meeting in July. Are there any questions? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Made by Councilmember Bartoni, seconded by Councilmember McCune. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve the minutes? Seeing no discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. And moving next to public participation, do we have any speakers? Okay, then just bear with me for a moment. I want to mention a couple of things about our public comment time. This is a valuable component of our meeting, and anyone who wishes to speak must complete a speaker card if you're with us in the council chambers this evening, or use the raise hand feature on Zoom. When your name is called, please approach the podium if you're here, or simply speak if you're on Zoom. To ensure that all who wish to speak have the opportunity to do so, there is a 5-minute time limitation, and I will let you know when that time limit is reached. If you have any questions for us, please mention that during your remarks and identify the official you would like to respond. That official will make note of it, and at the conclusion of public participation, any official who chooses to respond will have 3 minutes to do so as to all questions directed to that official. The official may choose to respond to your questions after tonight's meeting, and we may also post responses on the City Council's website. And finally, please be respectful to others in making your remarks. Interrupting others and using profane and abusive language are prohibited, and I want to thank everyone in advance for following these. We'll start with the council chambers. First speaker card, please.
The first part is Jim Groups from, with regarding shared use path on Old State Road.
Thank you.
Jim Rubis, 21 Point Circle, Wildwood. I would like to speak in favor and encouraging the council to adopt the resolution for the shared use path on Old State Road. Residents as far as connecting paths and everything, but basically it's be for safety. I remember the first time I rode my bike up that way, it came to the point where there was no more path and found myself in the street on Old State Road. And I know a lot of people like to walk along that way in order to get into the different subdivisions and paths around the lake. So I think it would be good for the city. I think it would be money well spent. And so I'm encouraging the council to adopt that resolution tonight.
Thank you. Next speaker card, please.
The next speaker will be appearing via Zoom, and that is Barry Hayf to discuss the path extension along Old State Road.
Okay, Mr. Hayf.
I first thank you to the mayor and to all of our council members. I just wanted to support the extension and echo what Councilman Garitano mentioned in the working session that this has been a long time coming for those residents who are impacted and would be benefited by the connection and the ability to finally connect to the rest of the community. This is one of those few projects that we can draw from multiple sources of funding to address multiple outstanding concerns, safety concerns, accessibility, and also serving the master plan of the community of connecting our city from one side to the next and connecting it to one of the best, I think, gems and wildlife corridors any city has to offer in.
Mr. Hayth, are you still with us? Okay, so unfortunately, I think we have lost Mr. Hayth. If he comes back on, we will continue to hear from him, but I think everyone got the gist of his comments, and I think he was essentially completed with his remarks. Do we have any other speakers? Okay. All right, so moving next to mayor announcements and appointments, we have a few appointments. The first one is to our Board of Ethics. This is a reappointment of Mr. Jason Bockert from Ward 6 for a term ending 2025. If there are any questions, I'm happy to entertain those. Otherwise, I would ask for a motion to approve Mr. Bockert's reappointment to the Board of Ethics. Made by Councilmember Rambo. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Galani. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, seeing no discussion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. And in one of the earlier drafts, just as a technicality, we had Mr. Lou Chris from Ward 8 also being reappointed as an alternate. And he has indicated for a few reasons subsequent to that being posted that he would prefer for us to find someone else. So technically, I'd like to have a motion to withdraw that from the agenda since it was on one of the earlier drafts. If someone would be so kind as to make that motion, I would appreciate it. Made by Councilmember McCutcheon, seconded by Councilmember McCune. Any discussion on the motion to withdraw that appointment? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Sorry. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion carries. Moving next to the Watershed Erosion Task Force, we have two. The first is from Ward 6, Mr. Mike Patton. He replaces Mr. Rambo, Councilor Rambo, who was previously on the Watershed Erosion Task Force as a resident member of Ward 6. And I think Mike planned to be with us this evening, but I don't know that I see him.
He's available, Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry?
He's available.
Oh, he is? Okay, good. So Mike, welcome. And if there are any questions, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, I would, for him or me, otherwise I would entertain a motion to approve Mike Patton to the Watershed Erosion Task Force from Ward 6. Made by Councilmember Rambo. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, excellent. And so Mike, thank you, Mike Patton, thank you so much for your willingness to step forward and be part of the team, and welcome. We appreciate that very much. Next is an appointment also to the Watershed Erosion Task Force from Ward 8, and this is due to the resignation of the member on the task force from Ward 8. And I am pleased this evening to present to the council for approval Ms. Deb Donaldson. You have her my memo relative to her background as well as her volunteer form. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to approve Ms. Donaldson as the representative from Ward 8. Made by Councilmember Garitano and seconded by Councilmember Galani. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. And then last is the Community Outreach Task Force. As you saw in my email from earlier today, we came so close to gathering an excellent group of people. We are missing one background review of one individual. There is no time urgency to this, so this will be on the council's agenda for the next meeting. I'm sure we'll get that done in the next 24 or 48 hours, and we'll present the whole slate to the council. And we'll also give the council much more time to review all of the appointments that are being made to this group. So somewhat similar to the earlier proposed appointment of Mr. Christ, I would ask if someone would be so kind as to make a motion to postpone this item to these appointments to the next council meeting, made by Councilmember Remy, seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Any discussion on the motion to postpone? Seeing no discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries, and I thank you for doing that. I believe when you see the final list, you're going to be real excited about it. It's a great group of people representing a number of different audiences in our city. We have no public hearings. Moving into legislation, second readings, we have two. Bill 2562 is before the council for final passage, and it concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Dodwell. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Clark. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2562.
Bill 2562, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing certain changes to Chapter 415 of the city's municipal code zoning ordinance, specifically Chapter 415.090 through Chapter 415.160 inclusive, which will have key requirements to review the permitting processes associated with ground roof-mounted solar panel arrays relative to their respective levels on surrounding properties, all being consistent with the Planning and Zoning Commission's letter of recommendation on this matter dated June 15th, 2020, second reading.
Thank you. And Joe, do you have anything further you'd like to mention to the council? I know we did, I think, had some discussion about this at the last meeting, but anything further you'd like to mention relative to Bill 2562?
No, sir, but the department's available to answer any questions or respond to comments. And thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Councilmember Bartoni?
Joe, I mean, I obviously read everything in here, and I really appreciated the redline version that you put. Okay, so I appreciate especially the redline version, but can you give us like just a quick summary, like highlight the big differences that and what we're actually, the differences and the major changes that we're making?
Mr. Bartoni, I would suggest that there's probably three major changes. First and foremost, most of the conditional use permits that have been granted by the Planning and Zoning Commission have required a landscaping component. Landscaping was not mentioned in the current regulations. We've now formalized that and memorialized it in the regulations so individuals can be aware of it as they go into the process. Secondly, we've made a concerted effort to ensure that any fire district involved in a solar energy system installation has an opportunity to comment. Typically, they see it much later in the process. Now they'll see it earlier. And then finally, being a community like Wildwood, which prides itself on its environment, we now are looking at components to ensure that when a system reaches end of life, we know where it's going, not just anywhere, but to an appropriate facility. So it's a sustainability component and protecting the environment. That would be my summary of the three major components. I would defer to Mayor Boland, who's a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, if I've missed something. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Joe, for that response? Okay, seeing no further questions, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2562.
Councilmember Dowell,
Yes.
Councilmember Ryan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Gross,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens, Councilmember Bernie,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Giovanni,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Edens, I didn't get your vote.
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Boat,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2562 passes. Moving next to Bill 2563 is before the council for final passage, and it concerns Ward 6. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Rambo. Is there a second? Ward 6. Councilmember Dodwell seconds. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2563.
Bill 2563, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, approving an adjustment of certain common boundary lines between three existing parcels of ground, known as a tract of land being all of lots 1, 2, and 3 of Wind and Pine subdivision, which is located within the northeast quarter of Section 16, Township 45 North, Range 3 East, 5th Principal Meridian, City of Wildwood, St. Louis County, Missouri, more specifically situated south side of Melrose Road, east of State Route 100, for the purposes of reconfiguring their common boundary lines for the purposes of defining their current use patterns, hereafter Wind and Pine boundary adjustment plat, with all being in accordance with the city's subdivision and development regulations. Second reading.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything you would like to mention relative to Bill 2563?
Mr. Mayor, with Julian's assistance, I will put up the proposed plat one last time so you can kind of see how the proposed lots will be situated on the overall tract of land. And the department is available for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Are there any questions to Joe or any comments? All right, seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2563.
Councilmember Ryan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Gross,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Bernie,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Giovanni,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Boat,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2563 passes. Moving into first readings, Bill 2565 is before the council and it concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember McCutcheon, seconded by Councilmember Bartoni. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2565.
Bill 2565, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, amending section 415.220 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Wildwood by deleting subsection D in its entirety, enacting a new subsection D of section 415.220, and providing for the composition and qualifications of the Architectural Review Board. First reading.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to mention relative to Bill 2565?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, with your permission. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, this particular item was presented at work session 2 weeks ago. At the conclusion of the discussion at that work session, authorization was provided by City Council to prepare the necessary legislation. I do want to note that the term limit has been modified from 3 years to 4 years per the direction of City Council. And that is reflected, I believe, by the blue type on page 2. Also, the department was unsure about the component relating to the 3 architects that must be regular members, if they should be licensed and practicing. And so that is an item that's been identified in the proposed bill. And certainly if that is not the intent, the bill can be amended before final passage. Thank you.
And Joe, you mean whether they just are required to be an architect, or whether they are, the decision is whether they're required to be an architect or a licensed and practicing architect, is that correct?
That's correct. Currently, all 5 of the regular members are required to be licensed practicing architects. Under the work session item, that was not detailed. And so again, the department was unsure and wanted to identify it. And if there is an issue, we can certainly amend it. Thank you.
How is the resolution currently drafted? My apology, I don't have it in front of me at the moment. Or
It says at least 3 of the regular members must be licensed practicing architects, which means the other 2 regular members and all alternates do not have to be of that same.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. Councilmember Edens.
I just wanted to clarify on something. I know what we've done in the past is when somebody reaches that term limit within that commission or board, then they're free to be moved to another board. Is there a slight loophole in that an alternate is not the same position? So could you serve, 6 years as an alternate and then suddenly be appointed a full voting member and then not have those 6 years count towards your limit on that committee, or no?
We'll let City Attorney Young respond to that. John, do you have an answer?
My position would be that they are 2 different positions because they have separate qualifications and authorizations. Just because they're on the same commission, they're not the same position.
Okay,
To address, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, nope, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry. I can't see you.
Oh, okay. Also, in response to the question raised by Mr. Vunich, the term architect is defined in section 415.220, and it defines one that has to be licensed. So there was some redundancy in the definitions and in the body of the appointing language. We didn't change the definitions, just the actual language for the qualifications or the composition of the board. So they still have to be licensed architects. Those that are required to be architects have to be licensed.
So in other words, John, you're just reiterating what Joe said earlier, basically. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out, if there was a shortage of architects, you could get someone in the pipelines as an alternate, have them, contribute in a valuable way, and then move them up the pipeline as needed so that we don't hit that limit.
Thank you for that idea. Councilmember McCune.
So my question, I just don't want to, I guess, preclude the architects that retire. So I don't know how the license works with the architects. If it's required by statute, I get it. But to say that they have to be practicing, what if they retire and they want to do this afterwards? So I wouldn't, if it's not required, I wouldn't want to necessarily push out those that are not practicing anymore. So I just like that discussion to see if that's required or if that's just an option.
So, John Young, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think the answer is a member who is no longer a licensed practicing architect could still remain as one of the non-licensed personnel on the board. And I think that was the general intent of the amendment, was to allow for non-licensed individuals because of that concern of being able to find enough licensed practitioners.
So did I read what is written wrong?
So there are 3 positions that must be licensed and practicing, but the remainder could be unlicensed, not practicing, and retired, what have you, and still be an architect and be on the board.
So I guess I misread what was written. Okay.
Okay, no worries. Okay, now, if there are no further questions, I'm sorry, Councilor Bartoni.
Question or comment would be, is the ARB okay with this?
Yeah, I started, so this actually came from me because I'm having difficulty bringing appointments to you because it's requiring everyone be a licensed practicing architect in Wildwood and who want and are willing to serve. And so when you get down to the end of that, it's very tough to fill this as the ordinance currently drafted is requiring. And then you combine with that the charter provision that says you can't serve more than 2 terms in a position. So before this went to Planning and Parks, I started with the ARB to get their ideas on what they thought. And with few variations, this actually came as their idea.
Okay, and I have a similar concern that Councilmember McCune had. I wouldn't want somebody who's a licensed architect that may or may not be on the board, and then they just, are fortunate enough to retire just because they're not. I guess maybe we need to know the definition difference between practicing and working. You could lose your job. Does that mean you're no longer a practicing architect? Yeah. Or
they can still serve, just not in one of the 3 licensed that are required to be licensed. So only 3 of the, I believe, 5 other positions. Is that correct, Joe? So there's
yes, sir.
8 positions. Only 3 of them with this change, if it's approved by the council, requires that they be licensed and practicing. The other 5 can be retired, lose their job, still an architect, but not licensed, not practicing, and so forth. So they're still able to serve, just not in one of the 3 licensed and practicing.
And the board is okay with that possible fluctuation?
That was their suggestion.
Okay.
Councilmember Clark.
I was just wondering, what is the purpose of having them practicing? If they are licensed and not practicing, maybe they have moved on to a different type of job, but they still are licensed as an architect. Why do we, what's the purpose of having them practicing?
So that's a great question. We'll start with John. John, do you have a response to that? John Young?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I missed the question.
So Councilmember Clark was asking.
The question be repeated, please.
Councilmember Clark was asking, what's the purpose in requiring that the 3 licensed and practicing positions be practicing rather than just licensed? Because maybe they're licensed, but they're working in some other field that doesn't require them to actually be practicing. So are you aware of the reasoning for requiring practicing?
I am not. That wasn't language I added. I relied on the definition in the Architectural Review Board requirements, which simply requires a license, that you be licensed by states, consistent with state statute.
So you just kept it the same. Councilor Bertolino.
Yeah, John, this is for you, and it's very minor, but if we make this change, is a quorum at a ARB meeting, does it require that the 3 licensed practicing ones be there, or is it just a majority of the 8?
It currently only requires 3 out of the 5 to be licensed. 3 of the 5 primary members.
No, my question, John, is if they're having a meeting and there's a total board of 8, do the 3 practicing and licensed architects have to be present to constitute a quorum, or can they?
No.
No. Okay, thank you.
So let's go back to Councilmember Clark's question. Joe Vinich, do you have any input relative to the practicing component for the three that are required to be licensed and practicing?
Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, when Andres
You can hear me
Dewani,
now?
developed the town center plan, he had told that it was important that any architectural review board that would be charged with the responsibility of implementing the guidelines associated with the plan should be licensed practicing architects. The advisory architectural review board that was first formed also carried that over. And principally, the reason is to ensure that the three members now are keeping up with current trends. And they do that by being a practicing architect. So they know when materials are changing, the new materials entering the markets, changes in code requirements, etc. Secondly, the thought is that they would be able to talk the same language as those architects that are bringing projects to the city, so that there would be a equilibrium, so to speak, or a understanding of what is being said and what is being required. Thank you.
Councilmember Clark.
So I guess I'm looking at it from my standpoint. If I'm doing engineering, but I'm still a licensed chemist, I keep up with chemistry, and I wouldn't want someone to, I would be able to keep up with the other chemists. So I'm thinking about the person who's an architect, and maybe he's just been promoted to vice president of his company, but he's still a licensed architect, but he's not practicing architecture. I would hate for him to be left out.
And certainly it wouldn't necessarily mean they would, because now 2 of the 5 regular members do not have to be licensed practicing architects, and any of the alternate positions could be filled by that individual. The Architectural Review Board, when this matter was presented by the mayor to it at its most recent meeting, felt very strongly that there should be at least 3 licensed practicing architects involved. And I guess I would just leave it at that. Thank you.
I think Joe's point out of the 8. And so much like the answer to the question from Councilor McCune and Councilor Bartoni, if they're not practicing but are licensed that fit in with your scenario, they could still be appointed as one of the other 5. They just wouldn't be one of the 3 that have to be licensed and practiced.
What if they change in the middle of the term? What if they change their job, they get promoted to something else, and they're not practicing architect at that point?
That's a great question. City Attorney Young.
The qualifications require that they shall be at the time of their appointment and during their entire term, residents of the city. And it just simply says 3 members of the board shall be licensed practicing architects. I would say you'd have to maintain that status throughout your term.
So the answer is if they were no longer practicing, they would not be able to serve on the board.
Right, and that's under the current language.
Under the current language. Councilor Clark.
So that would mean they would be left out at that point, because the other positions would be full at that point. So they would just have to step down off of the committee, right?
If the other positions were full, that's correct. Councilor McCune.
So 2 things. Oh, sorry. Are you comfortable with 3 for the appointments to be able to fulfill those?
Well, that's also a great question. It is difficult to do, but the Architectural Review Board, as Joe pointed out, specifically asked for it to be this way. And I am going to do my best, and I think we ought to at least give that a try out of deference to them. If I have difficulty presenting a sufficient number to meet that qualification, then I would go back to them and back to you and ask you to change it.
Okay,
But I'd
so,
like to try that.
okay, so just, what do you need, a motion to move this forward? Because we can always make the modification if we run into another issue. So to move, to call the question, or do you need a motion, or what do we
Well,
need?
So what I was going to, that's also great. So this has been approved and been read once. We are, and Katie, I've got you. I'm going to call you in just one second here.
Second reading.
We have several that on this that need to be moved forward to the council, and I've been waiting for this to kind of percolate and move through the process in front of the council. I would ask, because of the charter amendment that was passed and the term limits and so forth, that this, if the council is comfortable with it, that we have a second reading on this. But I want to call on Katie before we get to that. Councilmember Dodwell.
To push. For those of you who haven't been on council, previously, this particular committee had to have everyone be an architect. Part of the reason that this is requested is because it's difficult to find that many architects in one city. We have more here in Wildwood than you'd think, but I think I am going to vote yes for this because I think we need to reduce that number of licensed architects so that we can have experienced personnel in this role, but not be so handcuffed to not be able to approve architectural requirements for various building projects that we have going on in the city of Wildwood, because we're still out looking for 5 other people who might have the licensure. So I'm going to make a motion that we approve a second reading, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so we have a motion for a second reading. Is there a second to the motion for second reading? Seconded by Councilmember Farmer. And before I call on you, Councilmember Flasher, back to your point, Councilmember Clark. So under our ordinances, bills can be amended after they have been approved for second reading, but not during the first reading. So if the requisite 2/3 majority of the council approves of a second reading this evening, if you chose to, you don't have to, but if you would like to, you can make an amendment to it at that point, and we would handle it. Just FYI. Not, you don't have to, but just want to make sure you're aware of that. And that's kind of how we go through the process and how we have to do it. Councilmember Flasher.
I just wanted to point out from what I saw, it's saying at least 3 licensed practicing. So we could have 4 or 5. And then if something were to happen, like Ms. Clark was talking about, you could just move around who's in what position at that point. Is that correct?
We could, well, you've got 2 questions there. John Young, relative to the first question, what is your answer to that in terms of the other 5 that are not required to be licensed and practicing could be?
Yeah, in terms of if there were 4 appointed members who are licensed, as long as 3 remain, yeah, you're fine. So if somebody retires or gives up their license as an architect, we still have 3 members, and that's fine.
And then to your second part of your question, Councilmember Flasher, relative to moving them around, as long as positions are open or coming open, we could do that. Joe Bennett, your hand is raised on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have a question relative to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Since this is an amendment to the zoning ordinance, and the Planning and Zoning Commission has yet to see the proposed legislation, I guess I would ask John Young, is there a problem?
No, I don't believe that there is.
Thank you. Just wanted to check.
Sure. Nope. Good question.
Okay, so we have a motion for a second reading, and I would definitely appreciate that being passed. So for the reasons mentioned, and it requires a 2/3 vote, we'll do this by voice vote and see where we get with it. All in favor of a second reading of Bill 2565, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstention? Ms. Aldridge, please read Bill 2565.
Bill 2565, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, amending section 415.220 of Code of Ordinances of the city of Wildwood by deleting subsection D in its entirety, enacting a new subsection D of section 415.220, and providing for the composition and qualifications of the Architectural Review Board.
Thank you. Any questions or comments, Councilmember Clark?
I move that we amend this to change the wording from licensed practicing architect to licensed architect.
For the three positions. Okay, so we have a motion to amend, as she indicated, Councilmember Clark, by removing the practicing component of licensed and practicing for the three positions we've been discussing. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilmember Flasher. Councilmember Kuhn, you have your hand up. Is it on the amendment or on the main motion?
So with the amendment proposal, I just have one question that Councilmember Bertolino brought up. The quorum with the three licenses, it doesn't require any three of them to be there to pass legislation.
Correct.
I don't like that. I think that if we're going to require a license to be a part of the board to pass legislation, I think that it needs to be one. If we're going to make a restriction, I think that when they're passing bills or passing in a voting setting, we should at least have one of them. So
Well,
can we make the amendment there, or does it hurt, or does it go on?
I think for germaneness, we need to handle hers, then we'd come to yours next. But if it's worth anything relative to that analysis, the chair of the, actually, John Young, if you could just hold, why don't you stay on with us here, because we're getting a lot of legal questions. The chair of the ARB under this change is required to be one of the licensed architects. So,
Correct.
Yeah, so I don't know that it's required necessarily, and John can comment to this, whether the chair would need to be there for a quorum. But as a practical matter, I think it would be very unlikely that you would have a chair who is required to be one of the licensed and practicing architects not be.
Okay, because I just didn't see the purpose of having a license if that wasn't a requirement, because they could just practice and do these meetings without somebody that's licensed. So if that's what you're saying and that's how it works, then I feel a lot more comfortable with it.
I think that's how it would work. Okay, so back to the amendment, which has been seconded. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Councilmember Bartoni?
So with this proposed change.
Thank you. With this proposed change, is the ARB going to be okay with this? I mean, I don't know those guys. I'm not at their meeting. I mean, I was kind of like a little leery about this, some of the details of it, but I was like, if this is what they want, I'll support them. So are they going to be okay with this? What I think is a small change.
Yeah, we're anyone who answers that, myself included, we're going to be speculating, but my read on them is that they would likely be okay with it. It still contains the licensure component. I think that they would understand the intent of what's been expressed by Councilmember Clark. It's not to keep anyone off. In fact, it's to keep people on. So Joe Vinich, who's worked with them more closely than me, may want to comment differently, but my view, and based on my limited interaction with them, is that I don't think they would die on that sword. But I think they would likely prefer that it be practicing, because that's what they came up with. But they may not have given that the degree of thought that Councilmember Clark, has done, and so forth. So at the end of the day, I don't think they're going to die on that sword. Joe Vinich, do you have a different view on that?
Be difficult to speak for the Architectural Review Board. All I will tell you is it is the most technical subject any board or commission has to deal with, and that's the architecture of a building.
And all that being said, I'm sorry, all that being said, as nominees come forward, they could still be looking for architects that are licensed and practicing.
Correct.
It's just not going to be a handcuff.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rambo.
I think all of the comments, most of the comments are to try to help you deal with the term limit problem and the fact that we have a limited population of architects in Wildwood. And so I like this amendment. Rather than go back to the well again, maybe we can loosen it up a little further and say that they need to be licensed at the time of appointment, because I don't know, most professional licensures, they expire. And if somebody decides to retire and he's only a year in, but he or she wants to continue on for 7 more years, they're keeping up with the field just by virtue of being on the committee. So it makes sense to just try to do it once if we can, instead of, going back to the well.
So we'll handle, that's a little different first.
Is it?
First. I would say, just to conclude the thought process, Joe Bennett can chime in. I think the ARB might not want that.
Okay.
But that's just my view. So, Joe?
I would concur with the mayor.
They're already on the committee. So.
But thanks for the offer. Councilor McCutcheon on the amendment, which is to eliminate the practicing component.
Yeah, I'm the council liaison for the Architectural Review Board, and there was quite a bit of discussion. My opinion from the discussion is that they would prefer to have the bill as stated in 2565. And again, it was the concern that the architects be licensed and be practicing both, because of what someone mentioned earlier, is that being licensed is one thing, but keeping current is another.
Okay,
So that was
you're
my
speaking-
recollection of the
You're
discussion.
speaking against the amendment, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion on the amendment? We'll try this by voice vote and see where we get. And if we have a consensus there, we'll call it good. Otherwise, we'll do a roll call on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed.
Right. We're going to do a roll call.
We're having trouble hearing you.
So we're going to do a roll call on the amendment.
Councilmember Barton.
No.
Councilmember Bruce.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Venus.
Opposed.
Councilmember Rainey.
No.
Councilmember Farmer.
No.
Councilmember Galani.
No.
Councilmember McKeon.
No.
Councilmember Rainbow.
Yes.
Councilmember Hudson.
No.
Councilmember Garitano.
No.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Hope.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
No.
Councilmember Dodwell.
No.
Councilmember Ryan.
No.
So the amendment fails. Thank you, however, for making the motion, Councilmember Clark. So now we are back to Bill 2565 in its original form. Seeing no further discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2565 as presented.
Councilmember Bruce.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark. Yes. Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
Councilmember Rainey.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Galani.
Yes.
Councilmember McKeon.
Yes.
Councilmember Rainbow.
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Vogt. Is that yes?
Councilmember Vogt.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Councilmember Councilmember Rodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Ryan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
And Bill 2565 has passed. Just two things. Number one, thank you, council, for doing that. And number two, I could take the privilege of the chair just to say that that is some of the best debate I think I have heard. Excellent questions, excellent discussion, and thank you for that. It was just awesome. Moving next to new business. I'm sorry, to resolutions. We have one, which is Resolution 2020-17. Is before the council and concerns wards 7 and 8. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2020-17 made by Councilmember Flasher, seconded by Councilmember Garetano? Ms. Eldridge, please read the resolution.
Resolution number 2020-17, a resolution of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing submission of an application to the East-West Gateway Council of Governments and the Missouri Department of Transportation for funding a capital project to construct a shared use path along Old State Road under the Transportation Alternatives Funding Program for the St. Louis region.
Thank you. Rick, do you have anything you would like to add to the discussion we had in work session or to the materials presented to the council about this?
Yes, Mayor, briefly, if you don't mind, I just wanted to mention I failed under the direct budgetary impact to include the fact that there is an application fee involved with this submittal. It is 0.5% of the monies we're requesting. So for this project, that would amount to $5,600. So we'd have to submit a check for that amount with the application when it's submitted. So I just wanted to be clear on that. It is mentioned in the resolution. Otherwise, I'm available for any questions or comments from the council.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the council for Rick or any comments? All right, seeing none, all in favor of resolution 20 of the adoption of resolution 2020-17, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Resolution is adopted. That takes us to miscellaneous. We have one receipt and file, PC 17-19. Joe Vinich, would you mind speaking to that, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the Planning and Zoning Commission granted a conditional use permit to this particular petitioner for both ground-mounted and roof-mounted solar energy systems. The public hearing was held in December of 2019, and much of the time since the public hearing has been spent by the petitioner working with her neighbors and the homeowners association to address concerns about the ground-mounted solar energy system. Ultimately, the neighbors have endorsed the project as well as the homeowners association, and the new requirements that were approved tonight were integrated into the conditional use permit relative to landscaping, which is already installed, Monarch Fire Protection District review, and certainly the components regarding sustainability and appropriate recycling. Therefore, tonight, the City Council has the right to exercise its review of the decision by the Planning and Zoning Commission within 15 days of the receipt of its letter. Therefore, if you choose, you can exercise power of review. If not, 15 days from today, the permit will become effective. I'm available for any comments or questions, and thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Are there any questions for Joe or any comments relative to this receipt and file? All right, seeing none, Joe, the next item is an update on the Planning and Zoning Commission's work program, which has been provided to the council. Any thoughts on that you want to share?
Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, this is just to kind of keep you all in the proverbial loop. If there are any questions or comments regarding the work program, the items associated with it, or the progress being made, the department will do its best to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on the work program for the Planning and Zoning Commission or any questions? All right, seeing none, that takes us to adjournment. Someone want to make a motion to adjourn? Made by Councilmember Rambo, seconded by Councilmember Bartoni. It's non-debatable. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you so much.